I'm excited to welcome you back after lunch. Thanks for joining us today. I have a great opportunity with a wonderful panel of speakers here. I'm going to get us started and introduce myself. I'll introduce with some bios our panelists. We're going to set the tone of what we're going to talk about for about 5 minutes. So we're going to show you a few slides just to kind of set everyone on the same page who may or may not have been following the data usability work group. So that's what we're talking about today. And I'll give you a little bit more background on that. So that's kind of the agenda. I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to get situated and so forth. Make sure your phones are off so they're not going off while we're talking. And thanks again for joining us today. So our panel that we're going to be talking about this afternoon is demystifying data usability. And we'll give you a little bit more about what we've been doing since 2020 to do that along the way. On behalf of our co-chairs, Dr. Adam Davis, who's not here, and Dr. Bill Gregg, again, thank you for joining our panel today. We've done a lot of work over the last 24 months, and today we've just published our implementation guide, version 1. It's not one and done. We're going to have iterations of this along the way, but we want to get the industry kind of catalyzed and behind the usability improvements that we've suggested. And just to be really clear, Sequoia Project is not a standards organization. We are pointing to standards organizations' works that have already been published, derivative works, and really highlighting things from a different perspective. So helping bring together the usability pain points, trying to figure out how to solve those with a baby step. It's not as much as we'd love to do it. We'd love to do it quicker, but we wanted to put together something in this implementation guide that would really allow the industry to get behind it for a period of time. So the Interoperability Matters initiative. How many in this room have heard of Interoperability Matters? Good, I'm seeing a lot of folks. So I won't spend a whole lot of time, but Interoperability Matters initiative was launched back in 2018, and it started off with information blocking, has grown now to include data usability, emergency preparedness, so we have, and a new consumer work group that's about to launch as well that you'll hear a bit more about this afternoon. But the data usability work group is under that umbrella. There's a leadership council that actually, kind of leads and provides us the what is our work effort for the year, or multiple years in this case. The Sequoia Board of Directors, the Interoperability Matters Leadership Council, there's a public advisory forum that provides input as well, and then each of the work groups kind of have a feedback loop. So we're getting information from the top down, but also from our work group members up. The purpose of the work group, I'm not going to read this slide to you, but really was to create pragmatic implementation guidance to improve data usability overall. There are links. These slides will be available if they're not already posted on the website. And somebody asked earlier, these sessions are recorded and they will be made available to the registrants and our members after the conference. I don't know when, but the goal was to actually point to the derivative work published that's already been out there, and a real foundation that we built off of was from Care Quality. From the folks who might have been here yesterday's meeting, Care Quality actually started with some of this work in a joint document content work group that they actually started creating back in 2018 as well. The first version of it was published in 2018, version 1.1 in 2019, and then March of this year they published their white paper, which was Common Law and Care Quality, kind of reaching consensus on things from a different perspective, more technical in nature, but associated to their policy framework. The meeting started in October 2020. We put them into phases of what happened. So this slide kind of gives you the timeline and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we started October. Phase 2 began later on in 2021, 3, and then 4. We are just finishing up final phase 4, which is the publication of the paper as of today. The table of contents for the implementation guide are listed here, so it gives you an idea. Again, all that's available on sequoia.org's website today. And these are the 6 topic categories that the actual implementation guide addresses. So things like provenance, reducing the impact of duplicates, so you can read that. There's like an executive summary, a intent statement, a statement of intent, each of the topic sections, there's 6 of those, and then we have a few appendices at the back. The use cases are really high level, provider to provider, provider to public health, and public health back to provider, as well as healthcare entity to consumer. And each of those 6 topic categories have a problem statement, use cases, the actual guidance itself, the existing work, and then the actual, what the future is going to help. So we tried to give you a little bit of a teaser for what we left in the parking lot that we weren't able to address necessarily with this, that we're going to hopefully do in another iteration future. Our work group members really helped contribute to this, so on behalf of the leadership team, we want to thank them. We had a breadth of stakeholders. We have over 260 organizations, 350 participants from those organizations, and you can kind of see the breakdown of each of those. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and start with the questions. So just going literally from my right forward, we have Matt Doyle. He's worked as a healthcare developer for over 15 years, with the last decade focused on interoperability. He's the development lead for Care Everywhere, working with healthcare community to identify and prioritize projects of strategic value to patients, providers, payers, and more. His team has helped healthcare providers successfully implement a variety of standards-based interoperable workflows, including real-time chart exchange, electronic closed-loop referrals, disability benefits determination, and international exchange. To his right, we have Dr. Bill Gregg. He began his clinical career at Vanderbilt University Medical Center as an internal medicine resident, and then served as a staff physician at the Nashville VA Medical Center, and later went on to Vanderbilt as a co-director for the Center of Health Promotion and Disease Management, and was an assistant professor of biomedical informatics and medicine. Dr. Gregg currently serves as the Chief Clinical Transformation Officer and Vice President of Clinical Informatics at HCA Healthcare, as the co-chair as well of the Sequoia Data Usability Work Group. Dr. Stephen Lane is new to Health Gorilla. He is their Chief Medical Officer. He's worked in clinical informatics for over 25 years, most recently as the Clinical Informatics Director of Privacy, Information and Security, and Interoperability at Sutter Health, and has been a primary care physician for more than 35 years. Dr. Lane is the chairman of the Care Quality Steering Committee and is a member of the Sequoia Project's Board of Directors. He's also on the Health Information Technology Advisory Committee, or HITAC, the HIMSS Interoperability and HIE Committee, and the Da Vinci Project Clinical Advisory Council. And last but not least, we have Lauren Ripplinger. She currently serves as a HEMA's Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs. In this capacity, she is responsible for HEMA's advocacy before Congress and various federal agencies. With nearly 2 decades of healthcare policy experience, Lauren previously worked on Capitol Hill, where she was actively involved in almost every aspect of congressional office, including and serving as the Chief of Staff, a position that requires a lot of the ability to quickly synthesize multiple issues and adapt constantly. Lauren received her JD from American University Washington College of Law and a BA in Economics and History from Vanderbilt University. With that, I'll get our panel started. So the first question is, why data usability? What does that concept mean to each of you? And why is it important, particularly where there are so many things addressing healthcare today? Who would like to go first?
I can start. Okay. Yeah. So certainly, with my perspective as a provider, we started doing health IT decades ago, right? First we had to create digital health data. And then we realized 20 years ago we had to share that with each other, and we did all the work in interoperability. But just sharing digital data is not enough. The data has to be useful. You have to be able to integrate it into the workflow, bring it to the end user, be it the patient, the provider, other clinicians, family members, you name it. It has to have high utility, and it has to be used in workflow so that decisions can be made and the information can be understood. So usability is really at the core. The ONC talks about access, exchange, and use. So this is the use part. And the access and exchange are great, but without the use, it doesn't get you where you need to be.
Next.
No, I think that's very well said. You know, one of the ways that I like to think about it is this is almost like the last mile of interoperability. And to Stephen's point, there's so much that has been done. All that foundation has been laid, and now we're standing on the shoulders of giants, to use the cliche. But where do we go next? And really, it does come to the nuts and bolts of what's exchanged. So it may be that to the provider or other clinician that's receiving it, they don't have the right information. There's things missing, or there's too much information. Is it structured in a way that that EHR can make sense of it, can provide useful clinical decision support? Just saying we're going to package 120 pages of a CCDA document and it's on the clinician to look through it to find the useful information is an assumption we cannot make as an industry. And so doing that last mile and really solving that problem and keeping that focus on that usability is so critical, because otherwise all these other things are almost for naught. We've got to keep that focus, and we can do it incrementally. So,
I agree with everything that Bill just outlined, and the real goal that we're trying to achieve is to help our patients get the health care they need, make it easy for providers, for nurses, for all the support staff who are assisting along the way to make that happen. And you said it really well. I don't think it's fair to just dump hundreds of digital pages on a provider and say, good luck, the data's there somewhere. It's unrealistic and it's impractical. Instead, it's incumbent on us to figure out, how do we make the information that you need easier to find? How do we make it prominent and visible? How do we parse this apart? How do we figure out clinical decision support that can augment human intuition? And if we can get usability right, that really gets us another step towards that real goal, which is help patients get the health care they need. Data usability isn't the goal in and of itself. It's about what it enables us to do. Better care and better quality of life for providers.
Lauren?
Yeah, and I'm happy to chime in. I agree with my fellow panelists. And for folks that aren't familiar with the HEMA, we represent health information management professionals on a global level. And so the lens that we kind of bring to this conversation is really looking at it from an operations perspective, right? And data usability is really the core of what HIM professionals do. And really making sure, how do we derive useful information from the data and also make sure that information is accurate, timely, and complete. And so to my fellow panelists' point, right, like data usability is not the end point there, but really, particularly as we think about value-based payment, how are we making sure that we can trust that information at the end of the day to not just make clinical decisions, but also make decisions around payment and operations, which is so critical.
And I'll just add on one other point, which is really, again, some of us have been at this for a long time. But really, this lays the foundation for the beginning of the next iteration of health IT. Getting all the data in a useful format with all the semantic interoperability, the mapping, et cetera, is going to allow us to start taking advantage of health data. Mm-hmm. We really have only scratched the surface of this. There's a whole generation or two of work for all the young people to do after we get this piece right.
Yeah, this is a baby step. We've got a lot more work to do for sure. So this next question, I'm going to direct to Bill, but everyone else can answer as well. But because you've been involved with the data usability work group, consensus is really hard to reach, all right? So we've been doing this for a while now. What's different about the approach of the data usability work group that you believe will really set us up to be able to be successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it is, you know, these things have been, there's been so many iterations that all of us have been a part of, and some of them hit the mark and some of them don't. I honestly believe that the reason this will be successful, or very hopeful that it'll be successful, is I think we're playing upon the strengths of Sequoia. And so I think, as we've talked about, as Sequoia being a convener, we're not trying to take over anything. We're trying to bring everybody together in the same way. All the metaphors of the roots of the Sequoia trees, it really does make sense. And maybe that wasn't, that in a lot of these ways wasn't possible 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but all this foundation has been built. And so I think that bringing everyone together and saying we're not a new standards body, we're not trying to take over, but we want to incrementally improve things. We want the vendors at the table, we want the providers at the table, we want all the other stakeholders to really see, or the engaged members rather than stakeholders. And I think that, you know, as we really drive towards and keeping that end in mind, because part of it is to enable that provider or other clinician to know the patient when they see them. When they go in the room, the patient will have that feeling, they know me. They know the things that are important to me. And as we start layering on things like social determinants of health, we can't do those things just for the sake of doing them. They have to also be in the workflow and really help the clinicians to provide the right care that that patient needs. And I've just been, I mean, to me, this has been it's been so encouraging because I see that traction that we're making in that incremental way. So that's why I'm very hopeful that this will be effective.
Yes, Stephen?
I just want to echo what Bill said about the fact that Sequoia is the perfect home for this work because of the public-private partnership, the convening, and the fact that Sequoia, in its numerous roles, including as the RCE helping to implement TEFCA, is a trusted partner of everyone in the industry. And in that way, as this work does iterate forward, the ONC and CMS and others will be able to point to it. And just like USCDI, is moving forward iteratively on a year-by-year basis, this is another tool that we have within our community to be able to advance these goals.
And I'll just add, one of the observations I have with this group is, indeed, you shared the vast number of stakeholders that were involved in this, right? And one of those key folks is the end user, right? We don't always do a really good job of recognizing what are those end users' priorities. And I think what's unique about this group is the end users really had a role in not only identifying the pain points, but what do we prioritize? So the conversation is almost a bottom-up approach, right? Where the conversation now becomes, how does health IT best support the things that we're struggling with in the field, and how do we address those going forward?
Great points, great points. Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. How are HIT developers preparing for recommendations from the data usability work groups? I'm going to address these maybe to Stephen and to Matt.
Sure, I'll take a first jump at that. I think as vendors, we need to look at the guidelines that just came out just this week,
Yeah.
just published. I saw one fist pump, by the way, when you announced it was just published.
Yay! Oh, I over there.
We have some enthusiasm over here.
Love
But
it.
vendors need to take a look at that and line it up with what they can support today and really do a delta and figure out what can we do today? Great, let's go encourage our community to make sure those features are on. Is there some delta, some gap that needs to be done? Just speaking for Epic, we've looked at it. There's a few things that we need to support. Most of it we can already do. But we then need to go take those couple gaps, figure out how we're going to close those. We also need to work with our community to make sure they've turned on all the features to be aligned with this. And I think sometimes that's going to be broader than just flip a switch in your software and you're ready to go. One concrete example, I was looking at the labs recommendation or requirement to include LOINC codes. And that might require that some of our customers work with their reference labs to have their reference labs send them LOINC codes on interfaces, which means now we're dependent on third parties and their willingness to play in the game. And then our customers will probably have to update interfaces and do some other work to make sure that that's all getting ready so that we can package it up and send it along. So there's really a whole chain of responsibility in this. And as I think about what the ultimate goal is, sticking with this example of labs, I think the ultimate goal is to reuse labs data. And requiring LOINC codes is a great first step. There's a whole lot more that we're going to have to do. LOINC codes don't capture machine calibration, testing methodology, reference range, units of measure. And those are challenges that we as a community are going to have to really come together and figure out how do we solve, some of which might be technological, some of which might be questions to the standards group, Reg and Street, who owns it, and some of which, as I was just pointing out, might be operational that we all have to do together.
Absolutely. To
You
add
wanted
on
me to
anything?
comment?
Would you like to? You don't have to.
No, I'd love to. It's interesting though being lumped in with a vendor because.
Well, I think
mean, but that's
you're an intermediary.
That's right. That's right. No, as you know, from the beginning of this work, now whatever it was, 6 years ago that we started under the auspices of the Commonwealth Care Quality Group, it really did come from the end users. the complaints, the concerns that we had. I mean, Dr. Davis, the co-chair, Bill, folks within healthcare organizations really we were frustrated. We can't do this. Maybe with same vendor exchange we could do a certain amount, but once we got into the cross-vendor, cross-network exchange, you would lose a lot of that granularity and fidelity. So this was really an effort that originated from a desire to raise the bar for industry-wide exchange. And I think that Matt's point is well taken. As one of the major EHR vendors, it's up to those vendors that are capturing the data to really make sure that there are data fields to capture all this information, the provenance, the link codes, you name it, the sequence of the immunizations. All of these were called out in the guidance. And then as that data moves around the system through a network, through a QHIN, through the framework, we need to make sure that richness, that metadata, that granularity is maintained. So I think there's one role for the entities that are capturing the data initially. They have to capture it, they have to maintain it, they have to put it in their product that they send out across the pipe, and then those of us who are managing the pipes and the stops along the way have to maintain that data so that it gets all the way to the end user and is still in a useful format. So I think what can vendors do to prepare, it's to read this. It's very much like the ONC's SVAP process. This is coming down the pike. This is version 1, which came after version 0.1 and 0.2, et cetera. But, there will be a version 2, a version 3, but I think this is very solid. A lot of work went into putting this together, public comment, reiterating it. Today's the day, fist pump, version 1 is out. So all the vendors should see this and say, this is for real. There's a whole bunch of shalls and shoulds and mays that are baked into this document, and we should all be preparing for those, whether you're an EHR, a lab, a pipe, a network, et cetera, and knowing that, and also the document includes a lot of what we're gonna do next.
Exactly.
This is it sort of reads like a working document. These are the things you gotta do, we're really recommending now, and now we're gonna work on this. So you can see it coming at you, and the development teams, like my team here, is already reading this and thinking it through and figuring out how do we prepare for these metadata fields to be coming through.
Fabulous. Yeah. Building on that, the next question is really thinking about it not as an HIT developer, but more like, health information exchanges, health information organizations, or health information networks. What modifications do they need to make to their processes to encourage that adoption? So some of that was touched on just a bit, but the adoption of the guidance and ensuring that that data, with the guidance is maintained from senders to receivers, but also thinking about that for their users, their workflows. Would you like to go first, Bill?
I'll take a stab at that one. I think a lot of this is about starting a conversation between the customers, and obviously an HIN or an HIE is going to have a lot of different customers, whether it's the end provider or the vendor, to say, look, this is very important, and here are the things. There's a lot of standards out there. Some are required for certification, others are just there. But here's a way we can prioritize. And I've heard that from many vendors is, help us to know what's the next thing you want. Because everybody spent a lot of time and money and effort meeting the certification and getting a lot of things in place. But now we're putting some fine tuning on it. And knowing where to start, this kind of gives you a little bit of that roadmap. And so to me, it's about having that conversation and saying, because it's going to be, and I can't remember who had brought it up, there's going to be some things that are incumbent on the providers or the end senders of data. There's things that they have to do around mappings and things like that to make it work effectively. It's not just the vendors. It's not just the implementers. And so how do we get that whole community to work on this?
One thing that I'll interject that Sequoia and our leadership is really, doubling down on this. So we're going to do a call to action. So this is not just publishing a paper. We're going to help do more of that convening leading into 2023. Hopefully having a summit sometime first quarter, early second quarter. So there are things underway. There's not dates for these things yet, but our goal is to reach out to our partners, working with those that have members that are some of those end users, just to raise visibility. Because there's so much coming out to all of these clinicians, their staff, and so forth. So we're going to be doing more of that, and I'm going to point to Lauren. I know that we've been working with you some to start some of that planning. Would you like to share anything on what you're already doing within your organization to help support some of your users, maybe?
Absolutely. No, HEMA's been very invested in patient identification and matching over the last couple years. So, two things that we've really been focused on is one, many of you all are familiar with the Project USA implementation specification around standardizing patient address, right? This was an effort really led by ONC, HL7, and CPDP and X12. But what we recognized is that, again, it's critically important, right? But if the operations folks can't implement, right, and we don't take into account the operational considerations, it's just a document on a website at the end of the day, right? And so what we did earlier this year was release a companion guide associated with that specification to help folks within institutions begin to adopt that specification. The other thing I'll add is, we also released earlier this year a naming policy, right? We know that names are a huge challenge in patient identification for folks that work with the Master Patient Index and the Enterprise Master Patient Index, and so put forward a set of recommendations around, how do we best get consensus around a standardized documentation of a patient's name in whatever form and format that we might have, and also kind of have conversations with our vendors around how do we get to that more standardized form so it reduces the burden and makes sure that we maintain patient safety at the end of the day.
I'll add to that. I think, we talk about how do we get the word out? How do we build momentum around these guidelines? And I think one thing is go to the end users, go to the physician organizations, the nursing organizations, the lab, whatever it is, and help to explain that these basic standards of name, of address, of provenance, everybody can understand why they need that if you explain it to them. The reason you're not getting data is because your patients don't match because your names aren't standardized. Mm-hmm. Now there is a set of recommendations, and you should be clamoring within your hospital, your health system, what have you, to have your vendors implement to this new standard, even before it's absolutely required by the ONC or CMS or somebody else. I think, again, what we see in our industry is this evolution towards this repeatable, iterative improvement process. And this is, again, one more example of that, and we need to advocate for that so that people are ready for it. They're not waiting for that ONC rule that might come in a year or two that points to USADI v3 that includes, more of this data. They should be working towards it now.
Points. So we did, in the implementation guide, if you've not looked at it yet, it's about 40 pages, so it's not too long. And we tried to keep it as concrete as we could, but we did point to HEMA's companion guide and the Project USA work to really help with some of the pieces. Again, it's a baby step, but there's, in the discussion, some of the comments that we received 126 comments across the board, and we spent the last 45 days remediating those and resolving them to incorporate something to advise, and we're really grateful because all of those comments helped us make that paper even better. But really, one of the conversations I was having at a reception last night was this is not a one and done either, so we all have to think about it from our organizations because people change in these facilities. These frontline workers need that, the ongoing education, the new ones coming out. So I think that's one thing I would challenge all of us to do is to try to make sure to think about that ongoing education and evangelization that we need for that as well.
Yeah, that's so important, Dee Dee, and we've seen that. I mean, at HCA, we're a large organization, 185 hospitals, 31 million patient encounters a year. And we see that deficit in knowledge, and it's kind of, as Jim Jurgis often says, 7 times 7 ways. We've got to keep saying that and getting it out to those end users so they both know how important it is, but they also know what's available to them. Absolutely. Because sometimes when they don't know what's available to them, they don't know what to ask for next. And so that engagement is so critical.
I think the other thing I'll add too is, making sure there's leadership buy-in, right, within organizations. I mean, and being able to connect up why is data usability so important, and connecting it back to better outcomes, care coordination, and a better bottom line, right? I mean, we know that resonates with the CFO, right? We have those conversations often, and so I think that's a critical piece that's part of this too.
Very good points. All right, moving on. How does this guidance maybe enable or support some innovation work? Some of you have read this. I know we gave you a little advance notice on the copy before it was published so that you could think about it. But how would this maybe help enable innovation?
I'll take a first jump on that. It's really impossible to overstate the value of consistency in data when thinking about the efficiency that software developers can create new tools and improve usability. As a developer myself, there have been many times where we work on a project, we get a feature working, we test it, and then we do it over again several times because we have to accommodate all the variances that we see out there in the wild. And then it becomes a little disheartening when I visit some of my customers and I hear a physician who's confused and frustrated because a feature worked on this patient, but not on that patient. And of course, they don't know all the data under the hood, but often the reality of why that inconsistency is occurring is because one of the data sources was missing a field we expected or put it in a slightly different place than where we expected. There's some variation out there. And Stephen, I think that's what you're alluding to as part of the genesis to the Joint Document Content Work Group. How do we get consistency here so that physicians and nurses and all the staff who use this data have a great experience? And if we can get more consistent data, development groups don't have to spend as much time remediating that problem, and so we can spend more time innovating. One of the suggestions I would make as we look at future iterations on this work group and guidance is to stay focused on the actual data consistency and how do we constrain things down. Vendors are very creative on the actual screens, what buttons go where, how do they look. That's how we differentiate ourselves in the market. And so I hope that future guidance doesn't go into the dictating screen layout because that's the innovation vendors have to figure out.
Right.
But if we can stay on how do we get the data consistent, that really empowers the next generation of things to be better.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd recommend in terms of innovation, again, you can see in this document where the puck is going. You know, there will be convergence across the industry on these data elements that are going to be implemented in systems eventually, you know, by force, but now voluntarily. So if I were recommending, you know, to a startup or to an innovative company, you know, innovate based on this. You know, you can see there's going to be better provenance data. There's going to be better, more consistent immunization data. There's going to be better, more consistent lab data. And I mean, Lord knows, what we need in medicine is reconciled med lists, semantic lab interoperability, you know, reconciled allergy lists, and nobody's built that, you know, but that's a great opportunity. Now that you can see what's going to be coming with those data, then you can figure out how to do that reconciliation, provide that value add that providers have been crying out for.
So very true, very true.
One thing I would add, especially in an area that vendors in particular can innovate, is around clinical decision support. And that can be so valuable in the workflow. And it doesn't have to be something that's based on machine learning, just simple heuristic things to draw out what's important for a given provider or other clinician. And that consistency is critical to that. And so often, I mean, we've seen where the projects simply don't work because of that inconsistency in the data. And you lose the trust of your end user whenever it fails half the time or even a third of the time. And they can't trust that it's gonna help them provide better care.
Yeah.
Healthcare needs better reliability than half the time.
Exactly.
We've got to do a lot
Exactly.
on that.
Well, and yet, you know, medicine's been practiced with incomplete data for millennia, right? So it's like we can handle it. You know, we don't have to wait for it to be perfect before we can get value out of it.
And I'll just add the flip side of Matt's point is looking at it from the provider lens. And a great example is just looking at duplicates, right? We know we have dedicated teams within hospitals focused on this issue. Imagine what you could innovate on and use that team for if they weren't focusing on that, if we had better quality data.
Yeah, absolutely. The patient matching. I used to work with an HIE, and they had one full-time person that did nothing but help resolve for that geographic territory, those duplicate patients where there were, you know, information that needed to they always made sure to correct it at the source to make the patient merges or whatever happen, but they were the ones helping push that to try to help that, you know, be more, you know, ubiquitous but yet achievable for, you know, helping that workflow. What should be the highest priorities for the next phase of the data usability work group? Who would like to take that one first?
I'm happy to jump
Go
in.
for it.
I know on one of the lists that didn't make the cut this round was the improving privacy and security labeling. You know, we are hearing that a lot from our folks, that this is a cause for concern, particularly as we continue to meet our commitment towards information sharing and really making sure that we're respecting patient privacy preferences. You know, a great example is, you know, a mother who is pregnant and doesn't want to know the results of the sex of the child before birth, right? How do you make sure that you are meeting that commitment to sharing the information that she wants, but not perhaps all the information she may not want? Yeah. And particularly as we think about more of the collection of social needs going forward, and I know someone mentioned earlier, you know, things like intimate partner violence, how we, again, thinking about through those issues to make sure that that information is still kept private and confidential and secure.
Great point.
What she said. Also, I know it seems sort of a picky little thing, but we did cover it in the document. So provenance.
Yes.
Data provenance is really important, and it's really hard. And in USCDI v1, we got, you know, author organization and timestamp, and we've been trying in each iterative version of USCDI to get author name in there, and the ONC keeps pushing back against us, but you know, now it's cited in the document as some place where we need to go. I think that would be so helpful, and a great opportunity for some pretty straightforward innovation. I mean, if you just right-click on any data element, wouldn't it be nice to be able to see who the originating author was and where it came from, you know? So I think that's a key piece of information that could be used very fruitfully by clinicians and I think a lot of other data users.
I know our work group had a lot of discussions about that. Some of the work group were really opinionated, wanted it to be stronger than what we had in there. But I know that we decided to, as a leadership team, we talked about it quite a bit, trying to think about, okay, until this is well defined with the information that you need for roles and things like that, maybe don't get too far ahead and put the cart before the horse type thing. But Bill, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it was kind of acknowledging that tension, but we wanted to be it as a call to action for those groups to, because there were, you know, the vendors were worried, you know, how do we do this until it's defined? And so I think that's what our next phase is in many of these areas where we knew it was critical and important, we want to start with those stakes in the ground right away and start moving it along so the next version can have those things with the teeth that we need. A couple other areas, one of them was in lab.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that was because there's so many different groups involved, whether it's SHIELD, CLIA, and others, and there's so much challenge around the edges that we thought convening those groups. Another space was in just the consistency of content that is shared. And this is something that came from provider groups pretty regularly, is that they saw a lot of inconsistency. So simple things were missing. And so we think that's, you know, in a lot of ways, low-hanging fruit.
Oh, yeah.
It's just configuration. And so I think those are, but some of the more complex issues like provenance and like lab, I think are going to be some of the first ones we're going to tackle this next phase.
If I could put in a plug, Dee Dee. So this challenge of author name in provenance has been discussed at length.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in our ONC Interop Standards work group. And our recommendation last year, which again ONC decided not to bother with,
I know.
was...
We even put our comments to try to help you.
I know, was at least give us the author name if the author is the patient.
Oh, that's a good point.
No, it's a very simple one, right? There's no ambiguity when sometimes it's hard to know who's the author of a potassium or a systolic blood pressure or a head circumference, but if the author is the patient, you should be able to identify that. So if you have a chance to put in comments on any recommendations, that's a way for us to step towards author.
Absolutely.
One other suggestion I might make for future work group, and this builds on what Laura was saying, is thinking about chart corrections. So patient matching is a part of that, but it's a lot broader. Unfortunately, for better or worse, sometimes the wrong data gets on a patient's chart and that has to be corrected. Prior to interoperability, that was a challenge within your organization to solve. Now that interoperability is much more available, it's becoming a team sport. It's I need to correct data and then I need to tell someone else, I sent you something wrong, you need to correct it, and that might daisy chain several times. So I think it would be really great to talk about what information needs to be exchanged to support that workflow to get data corrected.
And I'll just add to that, we've heard from our members that chart corrections have gone up dramatically since October because people are looking more closely at their information and they find things wrong in the record and want to do those corrections.
There is an HL7 work group working on a workflow for that, to support that. And again, ONC is aware of that, and we've encouraged them to support that work.
Absolutely. And one last question. I know we're just about up on time, but are there any opportunities for CMS or others to help support some of the adoption in this guidance that's been provided or anticipated? I think we had some regulations that just came out recently, but is there any opportunity that you would like to interject?
So I think there's always an opportunity when we're talking about usability and better standards, right, to figure out how do we support that. And ONC and CMS are natural agencies involved in those conversations. I think from our perspective, we would just want to make sure that, you know, I see it more almost in the promoting interoperability as a potential measure, but if that is the case, we really want to make sure that any measure a provider is held to is not going to be penalized, right, if their vendor may not support the adoption of that usability implementation guide.
One of the opportunities that I see is building this into TEFCA. I think there should be some policy avenue within TEFCA to talk about data quality, consistency, usability. And one of the nice things about it is it's not mandatory. So you know everyone who participates in TEFCA wants to be there. The QHINs, the participants, sub-participants, top to bottom, everyone who's there wants to be there. They want to put in the effort to be a part of it. And so I think that means you have a coalition of the willing, and it would be a great place to talk about adoption.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of that process is going to be testing. And so I know that's one of the things is that we tried to structure the document to really be focused on testable, that it's testable. And you know, this is just shining a light, as I'm looking at these very bright lights, shining a light on what's working and what's not working. And until we do that, and knowing that there's different groups that may be the ones that have to fix it, we're never going to make progress. And so that's going to be, even before there's teeth, we've got to shine that light, let everybody let's raise all the boats, and we'll all benefit from it.
And let me just supplement that by saying, and Dee Dee is in charge of testing for TEFCA.
Yeah.
There's a really natural progression
influence
here.
there. Well, I want to thank our panel. Please join me, round of applause for the panel. I'm going to get off the stage because we're at time, but thank you, and our next session will start in just a moment. Thank you.